They were never meant for a fleet engagement. They were thin-skinned convoy guards. Their armor was non-existent. To the officers of the Japanese Imperial Navy, they were tin cans, disposable nuisances to be swatted aside. Yet, on October 25, 1944, a handful of these tin cans would be the only thing standing between the world's largest battleship and the entire American invasion of the Philippines. Now, let's access the field logs and analyze the true nature of this story. The greatest naval battle in history. This was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a colossal, complex pincer movement by the Allies. General Douglas MacArthur had just waded ashore, fulfilling his famous promise, "I have returned." Their protection was entrusted to the U.S. Third Fleet, commanded by the aggressive Admiral Bull Halsey. Halsey commanded the fast carriers and battleships. He was the heavy anvil, waiting for the Japanese hammer. But the Japanese had a plan, a feint. A moment to let the feint sink in. A decoy fleet. This northern force was a collection of hollowed-out carriers, bait which Halsey took completely. He sailed his entire Third Fleet north in pursuit, leaving the invasion beaches catastrophically exposed. When we analyze this decision, we see a critical failure of communication and a critical underestimation of the enemy. This left the southern force, the true Japanese hammer, an opening. This was Center Force, led by Admiral Takeo Kurita, a terrifying armada of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. At its heart was the super battleship Yamato, the most powerful warship ever built. And what stood in its way? Taffy 3. Not a fleet, but a task unit. 6 small, slow jeep carriers designed for anti-submarine work. Their only protection was a tiny screen of 3 destroyers and 4 smaller destroyer escorts. They were the leftover scraps of naval power, now facing the main enemy fleet. Their call sign was Taffy 3. And they were, by every metric of naval warfare, hopelessly outmatched. They weren't just vulnerable, they were a sacrifice waiting to happen. The morning of October 25th dawned with a deceptive calm. The men of Taffy 3 were preparing for routine anti-submarine patrols. Suddenly, a pilot on patrol broke radio silence, his voice high with disbelief. He was spotting pagodas. The unmistakable pagoda-style masts of the Japanese Imperial Fleet. Kurita was here. Lookouts on the American carriers stared in horror. Splashes of water, colored dye from enemy ranging shells, erupted around them. The Japanese were firing from over 20 miles away, a distance the American 5-inch guns couldn't possibly hope to match. The Yamato's first salvo landed, straddling the escort carriers. The situation was immediately, catastrophically clear. Taffy 3 was not a fleet, it was a target. Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, gave the only order he could. He turned his slow carriers into the wind to launch planes and ordered his escorts to do something, to make smoke, to buy time. On the bridge of the destroyer USS Johnston DD-557, Commander Ernest E. Evans did not wait for orders. A man of action, Evans, of Cherokee and Creek heritage, was a graduate of the Naval Academy. He was known as a fighter. He had told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I am going to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one got off. When we analyze this moment, we see the anatomy of an impossible choice. Evans had 2 options. He could follow orders, lay smoke, and retreat with the carriers, likely watching them be picked off one by one. Or he could attack, a suicidal charge. He chose to attack the most powerful naval force ever assembled. His ship, the Johnston, had 10 5-inch guns. The Yamato alone had 9 18.1-inch guns, each firing a shell the weight of a small car. It was not a fair fight. It was an execution. But Evans saw the why with perfect clarity. It was about creating a distraction so profound, so insane, that it might just throw the enemy off balance. All hands, general quarters! Evans's voice cut across the ship's intercom. He ordered flank speed toward the Japanese line. He was not just laying smoke. He was initiating a torpedo run. He was charging the Leviathans alone. The Johnston was the first ship to turn, the first to commit. She was a single, defiant tin can, accelerating into the teeth of the Japanese wolf pack. The momentum of the battle had been set. She was a lone wolf. The Johnston raced ahead of Taffy 3, her hull vibrating violently. She was a tiny target, moving at 30 knots, a gnat challenging a lion. The Japanese line, momentarily baffled by this single, suicidal destroyer, began to focus its fire. Evans was steering directly into a wall of high-explosive shells, 10 torpedoes. That was her entire main armament against the battleships. Evans pushed his ship inside the enemy's minimum range, dodging salvos. At 10,000 yards, a knife fight range for naval gunnery, he unleashed his fish. This was not just an attack. It was a desperate gamble to break the enemy's formation and morale. And in the chaos, a torpedo found its mark. The heavy cruiser Kumano, leading the Japanese squadron, shuddered violently. The Johnston's torpedo had blown her bow clean off. She fell out of line, mortally wounded, and forced to withdraw, defeated by the smallest ship on the battlefield. It was an unbelievable victory, but it came at a terrible price. Retaliation was instant. A storm of 14-inch and 6-inch shells converged on the Johnston. 3 shells hit simultaneously. They smashed the bridge, knocking out the aft engine room, radar, and all power to the rear guns. Shrapnel tore through the bridge, wounding Commander Evans and killing many, but he remained on his feet, shouting orders. The ship was crippled, her speed cut in half, but she was not dead. For the next 2 hours, the Johnston was a phantom. She darted in and out of her own smoke screens, a wounded animal that refused to die. Evans, his hand wrapped in a handkerchief, was now calming the ship from the stern, yelling orders down to the emergency steering column. When we analyze her log, we see she fired over 200 rounds after being effectively destroyed. She intentionally drew fire away from the escaping carriers. She engaged Japanese cruisers. She even fought a Japanese destroyer squadron. She fought until she sank. Finally, surrounded and pulverized, the Johnston lost all power. At 9:45 a.m., she was dead in the water. Commander Evans gave his final order: abandon ship. As the Johnston rolled over, a surviving Japanese destroyer captain was seen saluting the sinking American ship. It was the ultimate sign of respect for an enemy that had achieved the impossible. The Johnston was gone, but the fight she started was not. Her suicidal charge had been a spark in a powder keg. Inspired by her audacity, the other destroyers and escorts of Taffy 3 plunged into the fray. The USS Howell and Heermann followed, launching their own torpedo runs. The tiny destroyer escort, USS Samuel B. Roberts, the DE that fought like a battleship, engaged Japanese cruisers with its 2 small 5-inch guns. The Japanese were baffled. This was the why of the entire battle. Admiral Kurita, on the bridge of the Yamato, was in a state of profound confusion. He was being hit from the air by Taffy 3's planes, which, having run out of torpedoes, were making dry runs to draw fire, some pilots even throwing Coke bottles, and he was being savaged from the sea by ships he could not properly identify. He believed these tin cans must be the vanguard for Halsey's powerful Third Fleet, which he assumed was steaming just over the horizon. Why else would such small ships attack such a massive force? It was a bluff. It was a trick born of desperation. And Kurita, one of the most experienced admirals in the Imperial Navy, fell for it completely. The chaos, the smoke, the relentless torpedo runs, and the sheer, magnificent insanity of the American defense, it broke his will. He turned his fleet around. At 9:11 a.m., with the American carriers practically in his grasp, Kurita signaled his fleet to disengage and withdraw. He was retreating from a handful of destroyers and jeep carriers he had all but annihilated. Taffy 3, by all logic, had lost the battle. They lost 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, and the carrier Gambier Bay. Commander Ernest Evans was never found. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. But in one of the most stunning upsets in naval history, the defeated had won the war. They saved the army. They saved the entire Philippine invasion. The sacrifice of the Johnston and her sister ships of Taffy 3 is not a story of technology or overwhelming firepower. It is a story of a moment. It is a testament to the asymmetrical power of raw courage.
Of the small David, the
It
USS
proves
Johnston.
that sometimes the will of a few, defiant and unbroken, can face down an empire and change the course of history. History is often written as a grand narrative of empires and inevitabilities, a river flowing toward a preordained sea. But on the waves of Leyte Gulf, the men of Taffy 3 proved that the river can be turned. They showed that the course of history is not dictated by the weight of steel, but by the spine of the men who command it, proving that even in the face of annihilation, there is no such thing as a hopeless fight.